Hello, everyone. Welcome. Isn't it good to be back in person, right? We are all so glad to be here for our first Salt and Light gathering in person after COVID shut us down. My name is Kim Daniels. I am one of the co-directors of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. Along with my friend and colleague, John Carr, my other co-director, I want to welcome all of you here to this first in-person Salt and Light gathering for young people since the COVID shutdown took us online some 2.5 years ago. We also want to welcome those of you who are joining us online from around the country. Since the COVID shutdown began, we've had 53 dialogues reaching over 190,000 people nationally and internationally. We're glad to be able to continue that outreach with this in-person gathering here at Georgetown University in Washington, with a chance to enjoy good food and drinks and conversation before and after this gathering. And what a discussion we have on deck for you here tonight, focusing on what is the good life now and examining questions of work, relationships, faith, and wholeness in these challenging times. We've brought together 4 remarkable Catholic leaders with differing expertise and experience to explore these questions and introduce them and moderate tonight's discussion. I want to hand it over to our wonderful colleague, Anna Gordon, the Initiative's program director and the leader of our Salt and Light gatherings. Anna, over to you.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. So excited to be in this space with all of you here at the School of Continuing Studies. Like Kim, I want to welcome you all, and I especially want to welcome everyone watching on the live stream. I think this is our first in-person Salt and Light gathering that we are live streaming out to those of you watching from all over the country, a few people all over the world. So thanks so much for being a part of this. As Kim said, we're here tonight to host this Salt and Light gathering on a really important topic. What is the good life now? Work, relationships, faith, and wholeness today. This topic really resonates with me. I'm a Catholic, I'm a millennial. I got married during COVID, like some other people, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed by our world today. We're just under 2 weeks away from the midterm elections here in the United States, and politics has never been more divisive. Global conflict, climate crises, and systemic racism, just to name a few of the overwhelming issues we face, they seem insurmountable to me as an individual. And unfortunately, I also see some big challenges in the Catholic Church, in my faith. There's many church leaders who seem out of touch with me and my role as a young person, and some leaders aren't leaning into Pope Francis's mission and message, which is so vibrant. As we reflect back on the COVID-19 pandemic, a pandemic we're still living with, I think about how hard it was to maintain meaningful relationships and to balance work and family and faith, and also remember to have some fun. So I'm having a hard time understanding what a good life could look like in this moment. But thankfully, we have 4 very wonderful people here to help us, all of us, me and all of you, understand what fulfilling work, relationships, faith, and lives mean today. So first we have John Gehring, who is the program director at Faith and Public Life, a contributing editor at Commonweal, and an adjunct professor of journalism at American University. Bell Yang is a professor of counseling, developmental, and educational psychology at Boston College, and the co-author of How to Navigate Life, the new science of finding your way in school, career, and beyond. I'll bring this up later. Christian Sunin, our projects manager here at the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University, and he also has a background in immigration advocacy. And finally, Megan Sullivan, who's the Wisely Family Collegiate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame and the co-author of The Good Life Method, Reasoning Through the Big Questions of Happiness, Faith, and Meaning. Megan gets a little extra credit because her book title made it into the title of our event. So. When we get to the Q&A period, we'll be taking questions from our audience here in SCS, so be thinking of those questions for those of you in the room. For those who are joining us on the live stream, please share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag GoodLifeGU and by tagging GUCST Public Life. And with that, let's begin the conversation. I'm going to ask all of these speakers here just a brief opening comment. And it's pretty basic. What does the good life look like for young Catholics in the United States today? I'll start with you, Megan. So after COVID, at a time of conflicting pressures of family, work, relationships, faith, and a polarized culture and politics.
I've been moved. Well, first I have to apologize. I warned Anna about this. I've been getting over laryngitis for the last few weeks, and I made some poor decisions with respect to speaking at an event on Tuesday. So now you're getting human flourishing advice from like Selma Bouvier from The Simpsons tonight. I normally don't sound like this. I absolutely agree that it is a challenging time for young Catholics, especially thoughtful Catholics who are trying to think not only about what's good in their own life, but the common good. And I think that these are areas where, especially in America, our aperture has gotten really closed. Like there just seems to be this really narrow line of talking points, of ideas that you're able to entertain if you're Catholic and you're American and you're a young person. And the options just seem to get more and more limited, it feels like, every election cycle. I find this really sad as a philosopher because, philosophy's been in the business for 2,300 years of trying to blow up conventions and ask hard questions. But even more so as somebody, I'm 39, young-ish, still about to be middle-aged Catholic, who oftentimes in the news, even around my university, hear ideas put to me as though they're things I ought to be agreeing with because of my identity, and I just don't. Like, I can think for myself. And I think that Pope Francis has done a really remarkable job in the last 2 years, especially with Fratelli Tutti and with some of his public speeches, of trying to shake us out of that idea that there's going to be these kind of easy political talking points for the good life that come from our faith. So I agree with you that it's pretty challenging. And I think coming out of COVID in this period of massive social upheaval, one of the most important things that we could do is what's happening exactly tonight. Like, you get a bunch of folks who don't necessarily know each other, who are willing to hit pause for 2 hours and possibly encounter a perspective that's different from their own. I mean, that if there's anything that's going to start to heal us, I think it's going to be this.
Thank you for that. John, how about you? What does the good life look like for young Catholics in the United States today?
Well, first I should say it's hard to follow the person who wrote a book on the good life, so I feel like I should have read your book before I answer this. No, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, I think, I've been thinking a lot about this notion of disruption. We've lived through 2 years of disruption. And I read a lot of the Franciscan Richard Rohr. Some of you, I'm sure, follow his writing, and we should pray for him. He seems like he's coming to the end of his life right now. But he writes a lot about liminal space. And liminal space, if you've read about this, is this idea of being betwixt and between something. Kind of something has ended, something is about to be born, but we can't quite see what that is yet. And I think we've all been kind of in this kind of post-COVID fog, trying to navigate through this very complicated time. I think for me, as someone who is a Catholic, someone who is educated by Jesuits, I turn a lot to Ignatian spirituality, particularly discernment. And I'm sure folks here are familiar with discernment and being attentive and attuned to your interior life. And the great thing about discernment and liminal spaces, one thing that Rohr talks about is liminal space is kind of a graced period because we have to give up control. We don't know what's coming next. And as hard as liminal space is, being between two worlds, it's also the only place the great sort of spiritual teachers and the wise people throughout the centuries have taught us where real transformation happens. So if we can get through it, and Pope Francis talks about sort of not letting this pandemic go to waste in a sense, right? Like, how do we create something new out of this? So that's something I'm thinking a lot about, like how in this moment of disruption can we use discernment to deepen our lives, to chart a better path forward and not simply just fall back on kind of old habits that haven't worked. And I think the last thing I would add is just, I think, having a spirituality of gratitude. We are all here in this room. We have survived COVID. We have the luxury and the privilege of, as you were saying, to have these deep conversations, and many people don't have that. So just being attentive and aware of that gratitude.
Thanks. Bella, how about you? What does the good life look like?
That's such a big question, and I realized that I really didn't know when I was thinking about that. And I think that maybe my answer really has to do with this embracing of not knowing, which I'm hearing our colleagues talk about. Is that I think like in Western religion, we oftentimes cling so tightly to what we know, what we understand. It's very, very comforting to us. And as all bets are off and things have been tossed up that we thought, institutions have disappointed us from everything from education, politics, religion, media. They've created a lot of disillusionment in our young people for good reasons. And so I think that my response really comes from a position of thinking of ourselves as humble seekers. I love this quote that says that we are seekers journeying towards wholeness. Let me just say that again. We are seekers journeying towards wholeness. What are we seeking? My book on how to navigate life is really not about knowing how to navigate life. It's knowing how to ask questions that allow us to seek and not being afraid of the not knowing. What are we seeking? Purpose, a purposeful life that we can begin to discover. It's not like finding the love of your life, that it's out there somewhere and you've got to find it, and if you don't, you're screwed. It's more of a journey, and you're constantly, learning more and more about what that purpose is. Our book is unpacking what are the elements of purpose and recognizing that it's a process to be able to identify them and then to come to articulate them and then to live into them with a great deal of humility and openness to change. I've learned a lot about this from the young people in my life, including my daughter and boyfriend who are here tonight. I think that this is a great opportunity for us to learn from young people who are not afraid to toss up all of the traditions and the cultures and the institutions that we've held to in order to feel comfortable and safe. They give us a template for living. I think there's a lot of bravery in young people to be able to toss that up and to be able to forge their own way and their own purpose.
And finally, Christian, what does the good life look for young Catholics in the United States?
Yeah, I think we're kind of at a moment where it's particularly easy to not have faith in easy answers, and I think that kind of forces us into a moment of creativity that maybe it's not unprecedented, but it's unprecedented at least during my lifetime, and I think during a lot of our lifetimes. The other people here have spoken about Pope Francis and about Pope Francis talking about how we rebuild better and how this is a moment to think creatively. And I think that's absolutely right. I think Pope Francis has always emphasized that this pandemic is something that we come out of better because we've understood a lot of the problems that have existed, and we've understood that older ways of thinking are no longer viable. And I think what that has meant for me, at least, is I think it's a chance to return to principles in a new way that maybe at least I hadn't thought about before. It seems so much that as I think about my career, or as I have been thinking about my career, it's almost like the only principle that people really latch onto is utility. Like, how can you make the most impact? How can you really impact the most people, make the most money, whatever. And utility is just something that I think we now have a chance to get away from. And there are all sorts of principles that a lot of us have grown up listening to and becoming acquainted with that maybe now is the time to go back to. I think for the people who have engaged with the Gospels, that is a whole set of principles that we can maybe begin to adopt a lot more authentically now. And maybe that can be some kind of guide. And so for me, it's really encouraging that Pope Francis tells us that this is a moment for creativity, because sometimes hopeless situations can really give birth to a kind of creativity that maybe we would not have been able to access before. And I think we have the tools to do that and to really create something better.
I heard, what is the good life? It's disruption, it's transformation, it's seeking, and it's rebuilding creatively. I think that's a great way to launch into our conversation. Megan, let me come back to you. You're something of an expert on the good life, as we've alluded to. You teach a popular course at Notre Dame called God and the Good Life, GGL. It's all in the book. And you wrote this book on the good life with your good colleague. Why did you focus on this in your teaching and in your writing? What is your assessment of the challenges that we face? And what's your advice for young leaders who are in college or right after college? There's a lot to be demoralized about with COVID and the economic challenges and politics that we've said. How can people seek the good life in this moment?
So God and the Good Life, the course got started at Notre Dame in 2015, 2016. I had just gotten tenure, and so was ready to take some bigger risks. And I was also kind of burnt out by having gone through the tenure process and had to write a bunch of really boring articles about tense logic and realized I was not finding a lot of meaning in it anymore. But I loved college. I love Notre Dame. I think one of the best parts of my job is being involved with the students, especially the freshmen that I get to corrupt every year. I didn't go to Notre Dame. I went to the University of Virginia, and college was a magical time for me. It was almost all accidentally magical. I did not come to UVA with a master plan. I think I wanted to be a lawyer. I had that in my mind. That didn't work. But that first year at UVA, I was kind of stumbling around like Mr. Magoo, and I stumbled my way into a philosophy class that I realized I loved. And I stumbled my way into a Catholic church. I ended up becoming Catholic in college. I stumbled my way into this debating club that drank a lot on Thursday nights, but also had really fun debates and really supported other students. And I started getting all of these kind of key ingredients to the person I wanted to become, but it was totally accidental, just wandering around. And then these kind of gifts were offered to me. Something that I'd thought about a lot by the time I had been at Notre Dame for 5 or 6 years is to what extent institutions like the church or universities could take some of the guesswork out of that, trying to acquire the pieces of the good life that every 18, 19-year-old is trying to do. So one thing that I thought really seriously about, I think somebody's got their YouTube going off. That's all totally fine. YouTube is part of the good life too. But something that happened for me in 2015, 2016 is I've been noticing this about my own students, but also my youngest brother. I'm 15 years older than my baby brother, Connor. He was going away to college. And I'd been thinking about this hypothetically about my Notre Dame students, but then when it came time for Connor to go away, and he went to Brown, he didn't go to Notre Dame, I was thinking, man, there's so much that I want for him, so many things that I want to happen these next few years in his life. And I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to have these conversations with him. They're really serious conversations about, honestly, what kind of man do you want to be? I didn't know how to tell him about the things that had been really meaningful in my own life. We have a lot of close brother-sister conversations, but we don't talk about the big questions. And so the idea behind the course was, let's use 3 hours a week in a philosophy course to try to learn how to ask these questions about ourselves and to try to learn how to be happy in the philosophical sense. Aristotle, when he taught his course about the good life 2,300 years ago, he has this amazing line in the second chapter of his book about the good life. He tells his students, we're studying this not so that we can know what virtue is, not so that we can be able to define what Plato thought virtue was, what dead people thought happiness was, but so that we can be happy. Otherwise, there's no benefit in it. And I am very inspired by this thought that these philosophical methods and these questions that plagued people 2,300 years ago in Greece, they still bother us when we're 19-year-olds or 39-year-olds in South Bend, Indiana. But you don't have to figure it out all by yourself. There are plenty of people that you can talk to, and there are ideas that you can access and that somebody should make sure get in front of you early on so that when these big good life challenges come at you, you have this in your backpack to take along with you. And so that was the idea that kind of germinated the course. And then the book came about. This is a much shorter answer because somebody told us a few years after we were teaching the course that a lot of adults have these problems too.
That's definitely true. So related to that, let's say you're a millennial like me or Gen Z. You've taken your course, you've read your book, you're very inspired, you're ready to live a good life. But then you look at your reality, your day-to-day challenges, the state of our country, the state of the world. So how can our faith and Catholic values help shape or enrich our responses to these day-to-day struggles that we face?
Something that we talk about a lot in the book, the hardest chapter in this book is the third chapter, and it's about responsibility. And it's hard just because the philosophy is challenging, but also the question is, what are you actually responsible for? And what are things that are just outside of your control that are happening to you, but are definitely shaping your happiness and the moral significance of your life? I think that is one of the most pressing challenges we face, and certainly we felt it during COVID. So what do I have control over, and what is just like happening and I have to move around it? You might think none of us had control over the spread of a global pandemic that canceled all of our activities, that totally turned our lives upside down, that might be killed or hurt people that we loved. That's clearly outside of our control, but that affected our ability to lead a good life. So how do you understand that? Like, how do you wrestle with that? How do you make that part of your story of your life, even if you didn't do anything to cause that? Then there's other parts of our life where smart, thoughtful, moral people wrestle with these questions every day. Am I racist, or am I contributing to racism in my community? Do I have any power to try to change these structural moral problems that are definitely caused by humans, and that I see myself as having some agency for, but I don't have total agency, and I can't change people's minds, and I can't stop this person from taking their approach? These are the questions that really plague us, and with good reason. They affect our ability to be good friends. They affect how we think maybe moral judgments about our lives are going to go 10, 20 years from now. So one of the topics I think that philosophy helps us wrestle with, there's no app. There's not like an Apple Watch thing that can show you your responsibility points for the day, or tell you if you plug in a particular decision you made, whether or not you made that decision in a really moral or thoughtful way, or how that decision is changing you as a person. That's the kind of work that you've got to use your own software for. And it's the kind of thing that requires both having a sense about what it is that you're aiming at, and having some language for also asking for forgiveness or for talking to people when you think you've fallen way short. And also some language for just talking about all of the things that are happening that you don't totally understand, to this point that Belle brought up, all of the things that seem like really uncertain and risky and terrifying, but are becoming chapters of your life story.
Great. John, you're here because you're our DC representative.
That's a lot of pressure.
You've lived in this area for years. You have 2 kids, 12 and 8 years old. You also wrote a book, and I'm sorry I don't have a copy of it here, but it's a book on Pope Francis. It's called The Francis Effect: A Radical Pope's Challenge to the American Catholic Church. You're known in your role at Faith in Public Life for advocating for public policy on voting rights, racial justice, immigration, all these tough things we were just talking about. But we're not here to talk about that critical work today. We want to talk about what it's like to hold together family, work, politics in today's Washington and beyond. So tell us about being a father of a young Catholic, youngish Catholic, living in Washington. What is it like raising kids in a world that's so challenging, and what affirms you and encourages you as a father?
Yeah. I think balance is the key to all of our lives, right? Like, how do we be good partners, good spouses, a good parent, a good professional? I certainly have not cracked the code on that. I think parenting is sort of like this exhaustion and joyous mix together. COVID was a really tough time for all of us, but particularly I think parents who were trying to just, the good life during COVID was just getting through the day without sort of losing your mind. So yeah, I think in terms of balance, and maybe going back to a little bit about what I was talking about before, for me, it's been about trying to cultivate my sort of interior life. And by that, I mean, how do I move intentionally through the world? You were talking a bit about this. We're not alone in this journey. People have been, there's nothing new under the sun, right? We've been grappling with these deep questions of the good life and how to be, a good person and how to balance all of these things for a very long time. I think it's gotten much harder as we're in this kind of pressure cooker culture, particularly in DC with politics, with social media. I write a lot about the intersection of the church and politics, and I'm kind of in the thick of it. I'm a very online person, and that can actually sort of drain you a bit and take you away from the spiritual life and the interior life. And so that's something I'm trying to be more mindful of. And I think part of what we know, and the philosophers on the panel can speak to this better than I, but how do we cultivate habits that lead to a good life? How do we cultivate an interior life? And I think some of that is just, how do we work in our weekly, daily routine? For me, for example, I remember, March 2020 when the floor dropped out and when we woke up to this pandemic. For me, poetry became a spiritual. I was never a big poetry reader. I don't know sort of how this started in a way, but poetry kind of became my lifeline to some sense of peace of heart, maybe. So I think, I've incorporated trying to read more poetry. Walking became a very spiritual thing. I think a lot of us took long walks, and that became a spiritual practice. So I think cultivating habits that intentionally bring you closer to yourself. We lose ourselves sometimes. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, let's talk a little bit about something you do know professionally and personally, Pope Francis. How do you think Pope Francis is calling us to live a good life? We talked about that briefly, but what does he have to say specifically about young Catholics and their relationships, economic choices, mental health, community, finding community?
I think what's so incredible about Pope Francis is some ways less what he says or writes, which is remarkable, but who he is. I mean, you don't have to be Christian or Catholic or religious to look at this man and not recognize that he radiates something that we all want, right? I mean, you look at him and the way he tries to live his life with simplicity despite the trappings of the Vatican, his intentionality around welcoming debate and even, welcoming that tension in the church. I mean, he's really a model, I think, for you could do much worse than modeling yourself on Pope Francis. I think you'd get to the good life. And I think to loop back to some of the Ignatian spirituality I talked about before, I think he's called the church collectively to this sort of examination of conscience and a sense of discernment about how he wants to move the church. As far as connecting that to our own lives, I mean, the Pope has written quite beautifully in the Joy of Love, the apostolic exhortation about relationships and about love and about how we should treat each other. Just really beautiful stuff. So I would encourage folks who haven't read that. You might not think you could learn something from a 80-something celibate person who's not had, a relationship or a marriage, but I think the wisdom is very deep. So I would, encourage people to check that out.
That's great. Belle, let's come to you. You're also a respected leader and professor on this very topic. You teach at Boston College, from what I hear, a lot of popular courses. As a psychologist, your courses and your research focus on fostering purpose. I love this word of purpose, and meaning and belonging in young people and in schools, workplaces, and communities. Tell us what you're hearing from the young people you work with on the challenges that they're facing, especially over the past 2 years with COVID. How are they struggling, and what role does faith, gender, culture, geography, socioeconomic status play in finding your purpose?
Mm-hmm. Such an easy
Giving you all
question
easy
to tackle. I think that in my observations of young people working with college students and new professionals for the last 20 plus years, I've just seen this water that everyone swims in, which has been a lot about doing. It's been not teaching one how to actually decide what really is of value. It's just this constant jumping through hoops and trying to reach this society's definitions of success. And we call it the performance mindset, that for 30 some years, we've socialized young people to sort of do all the right things, to view life as a zero-sum game, that your successes are somebody else's loss and your loss is somebody else's success. It's a game where there's very few winners and a lot of losers. And so if you're in a race like that, you want to win. And so you make decisions. That becomes your template, your GPS for what decision to make. Which decision is going to get me in the fastest way possible to wealth, power, and prestige? That's the route I'm going to take. And there's not a shame in this, because it's really like the educational system that we've been raised in has really fostered this mindset. With COVID, there has been, sort of like an unveiling of like, why were we working so hard? Like, it seems like, maybe that doesn't even matter. Why does success matter if we can't be happy at the same time? And so you see this whole like swinging over to the other end of the continuum, which is like about selling off your material goods and YOLOing it and embracing digital, being digital nomads and van life. And I noticed 6 million posts on with the hashtag van life. So it's not just retirees who are embracing the call of the road. And it's a decision that I'm not going to sacrifice my happiness for success. And so the swinging over to the other side is this belief that, okay, maybe my decision shouldn't be based on what is going to make me successful in terms of the world's eyes. Maybe it should be about what makes me happy. The only problem with this mindset, which we call the passion mindset, is that it also works until it doesn't. That all of our research has shown, in and out of our lab, has shown that this singular focus on making myself happy is not associated with happiness. It doesn't lead to that in the end. So some of the things that you read in like the scriptures across religions around happiness being hollow in the end is backed up by psychological research. That there's a lot of studies that suggest that it's highly correlated with actually anxiety and a feeling of missing out. And so unfortunately, we have these two mindsets that we have been navigating by, which are both not working for us. They're this success, achievement-oriented mindset, the performance mindset, and the passion mindset, which makes the question about how can I be happier. Both of those mindsets, there's not a definition for how to become happy and how to become successful. So we end up asking, am I happy or successful enough? But enough also isn't easy to pinpoint. There in the dictionary it says the required amount or something, so not helpful. So then we ask ourselves, well, am I as happy or successful as my peers or other people? And it becomes our success and happiness become a lot about measuring up and how do we compare with others. This interesting factoid is that 12% of our daily thoughts are spent in comparing ourselves with others. And that's a lot considering all that our minds have to process. 12% of our daily thoughts, whether it's when we're looking at social media or we're looking, at where we're thinking about our own success and happiness, are wrapped up in how we compare with others. And ultimately, we're never going to be happy if that's what we do, because there's always going to be people who are doing better than us or happier or appear happier because of their scrub clean look on Instagram than we are. So I think that a big challenge for young people has been to live by these certain navigational decision-making frameworks that really don't lead where they want them to. And I can share more about the alternative in a moment.
Well, no, that's great. I think, please tell us what. The next question is, what's an alternative to climbing this sort of ladder of success and everything? But also you talked about mental health. And I think this is something I wish that the Catholic Church at the intersection of faith and public life, we talked about more. There's so many young people who are isolated and lonely and facing depression and anxiety. What's contributing to this, and what are people doing about these really strong forces for young people?
Yeah. I think, in terms of going back to that question about the good life, I feel like one foundational need that we all have, if we just dig down to the bottom of this question and we ask ourselves, what is a life worth living? I think that, we all long for peace, and we are in this world of so much anxiety. I mean, you turn on the news and it's just like one disaster after another. How can you not feel constantly anxious, like your life, your future is doomed? And we just long so much for this peace that is so hard to attain by the world's metrics of success. That only makes us more anxious. By the decision that we are going to just make ourselves happy, that ends up causing disillusionment as well, because the things that we think make us happy don't lead there. So we desire and long for peace. And one of the things that I'm very encouraged by in terms of a faith influence and value is the idea that Jesus said, I came to give you life and life to the full. that our lives are not supposed to be about just like this constant anxiety and pressure to perform and living up to other people's standards and expectations. I know what that's like. I know that there's lots of reasons for that mindset, including some are cultural. I grew up as a child of Chinese immigrants who sacrificed a lot to bring our family to the U.S. so that we could have an education in the U.S. And so for much of my college years and early career years, I did everything I could to make good on their sacrifices. And that meant that anytime I asked myself what I wanted to do, I would ask myself, what should I do? And usually the answer to what should I do was, what are other people's expectations of me? And not really about what did I long to do? And it wasn't until a certain point in my journey that you can read about in my book. I won't go into all the details right now, but I realized I needed to start listening more to my own heart. And I'm encouraged when my kids say that to me, even though it's hard, it's scary. It's what are they using to discern, their path and their values and so on. But at the same time, I'm super proud of them. And because I know that when I recognized that I needed to begin trusting my own gut more and looking inside to determine what is purposeful to me, only then did I start to experience the freedom, the liberation from some of those things that really keep us tied to these external metrics of success.
Thank you. Christian, we'll finally turn to you. We were thinking about who would be good for this panel, and we came up with these terrific people, and we were thinking about this fourth slot. And then all of a sudden we realized we know someone who would be perfect. I want to introduce you all to Christian Sunan. You met him earlier in the panel, but Christian and I work together at the Initiative, if you didn't pick up on that yet. I'm so glad we get to share this space together to start your time with us. You joined our team this past summer as our projects manager, but you also went to the University of Texas at Austin. And when you were in college, you spent a few months in DC here working as an intern for two groups that worked on issues of human rights and security in Latin America. And after college, you worked on immigration advocacy down at the US-Mexico border. So while you spent some time in DC, you are from Texas and you've worked on the border. What's it like to pick up and move your whole life to a new place, to move here to DC? I know some people in the audience can relate. What's it like to start a new job, working at a university like Georgetown, and to begin to build relationships, friendships, support, and connections in the nation's capital? And what is the good life like in Texas, and what does it look like here?
Yeah, my process of getting here was kind of disorganized and all over the place, and I think that was really, in a lot of ways, a beautiful thing, in a lot of ways, a stressful thing. I got the job. I was at the border, and then I had a month where I was kind of couch surfing around, and then I spent a month at a monastery, and I can talk about that more later. And then I ended up here with this job. And I started working, and then there were about 2 to 3 weeks where I didn't have an apartment yet, and I just kind of moved here. And there were some friends of mine who were in the area who were just so gracious and let me stay with them while I started work. One of them has COVID and can't be here now, but I think he's watching the live stream, so thank you, John. But no, and then I found the apartment, and I moved into the apartment and had no furniture for a little while, and then I went back to Texas, put a U-Haul on my truck, filled up the truck, and then I drove up with my roommate David, and we got here, we set it up, and we were here, and then more roommates came, and it was just like there were all these different sets of events, and for a long time I had been really kind of adrift, and like I said, that's both a really beautiful thing and a stressful thing. And it becomes more of a beautiful thing, I think, once you get through the stressful parts, and then you look back at it and you're like, that was kind of fun. But yeah, I think that was really, that process is beautiful because you start to build up these new patterns or these new things that you really start to love. So for me, for example, some of my colleagues, or one of my colleagues, makes fun of me for this all the time. And I bike to work. Anna knows what I'm talking about. I bike to work, and I had to change my route through the city many times because the drivers here are just awful. And so I had to find a safe route. But in doing that, I see a lot of the city, and I would leave my apartment really early, and it was just silent sometimes. And especially now that the autumn is coming, it starts to get, the air is crisp in the mornings, and it's just a beautiful ride, and it's a peaceful ride, and it's a way, when I wake up, it's silent in the apartment, and I continue the silence. And so finding those new sources of beauty in my life has been a really fulfilling process. And I think that can't happen unless you're in that state where you're a little bit adrift, because it gives you those opportunities to find the new sources of beauty, and it's exciting and it's fresh. So I think for me, that has been a big part of enjoying this new stage in my life. And it could be, I think you could say, an element of the good life. It's just been wonderful.
Yeah, embracing the unexpected. I asked John about Pope Francis, but I also want to ask you, because I think you're the youngest person on the panel. Pope Francis just wrote a whole book called Pope Francis just wrote a book called Let Us Dream. Pope Francis loves talking about dreaming, which when you see the headlines, it's like, what is the Pope doing talking about literally up in the clouds thinking? But he encourages young people especially to dream big dreams. What role does advice like that play in our conversation today?
Yeah, I think the best way to approach this is I mentioned I spent a month at a monastery, and generally that tends to be a time where people learn things. I think monasteries are kind of centers of discovering yourself, or they have been for a while. So I spent this month at the monastery because, like I mentioned, I had been working down at the border, which, as you can imagine, is just an absolutely dreadful place to be. And I worked, and I was very close to a lot of the people who were there, a lot of the asylum seekers who were arriving to the border, and absolutely nothing goes well for them. Like, when I say absolutely nothing, I mean absolutely nothing goes well for them. And it's just loss after loss after loss, and injury after injury after injury. And after a while, I just couldn't, I could not take it anymore. And I just got majorly depressed. The way I like to describe it is the way I usually am is I look out at the world and everything is beautiful, and I have to remind myself that there are ugly things in the world. And it became, at a certain point, like everything was ugly, and I had to try very hard to consciously remind myself that there were beautiful things in the world. And so after I left the border, I figured nothing better to do about this than go to a monastery and see what happens. So I went to the monastery, and I brought a bunch of books that I thought were going to help me. I ended up reading only 2 of them, one of which I didn't even bring with me. I got from the monastery library. One of the books included an essay by Slavoj Žižek. One of the parts of that essay, he talks about the book of Job, and he talks about what the book of Job means. And then to supplement that, the book I got from the library was Gustavo Gutierrez's book on Job, God, Talk, and the Suffering of the Innocent. So very kind of relevant to the situation I was trying to work through. And so I read those 2 books, and they ended up with this analysis of Job that I thought was very helpful. It was very helpful for the situation that I was experiencing, maybe not very helpful in a logical way. Because what they said is that the book of Job reminds us, or reveals to us, that God, the omnipotent God, is really impotent. The omnipotent God can't do anything to help the suffering, and in some sense communicates that both to Job and to Jesus. And what happens is God says to both of these figures, well, God says to Job, according to Žižek, I can't bring your children back. Your children are dead. I can't do anything about it. But maybe you can find solace in the fact that today it was your children who died, and tomorrow it's going to be my son. And so I was talking about this with one of the monks who really accompanied me through a lot of this. I was talking about hopelessness, and I was talking, how do we deal with this? How do we come out of this? And after a long conversation, he just pauses, and he looks at me, and he says, Christian, sometimes you just have to let your heart be broken. And then when I went back to my room after that conversation, I found a book sitting there in front that he had provided to me that was called Darkness, Desire, and Hope, a very provocative title. And it was an edited volume of the writings of Constance Fitzgerald, who was a Carmelite, who wrote a lot about hopelessness, what she called impasse, and these situations where you just can't go any further. And what she says about them is that those are the places that breed creativity because you have absolutely no other option. And I think that's where we get to the state of dreaming. Because dreams that are coming out of heartbreak or dreams that are coming out of hopelessness are dreams that are the most authentic and the most sincere. Why? Because they can't help but dream. There's no tangible, real possibility there. It's kind of like the dream or the emotional equivalent of having nothing to lose, right? And so I think, and ironically, what comes out of that understanding is a sense of hope, because you understand that when you are hopeless, you can have a creative idea that causes you to be hopeful. It doesn't cause you to be hopeful, but there is hope in the idea that creativity comes out of this void of hopelessness. So I think dreaming for me has really taken on a new dimension when I think about it that way, that dreams are these things where we can imagine something radically new, something radically creative because there's no other option. And that's really all we have left.
Thanks for sharing that. That was powerful. We're going to come to questions very soon. So if you have a question, start thinking about it. I just want to ask one other quick question and throw it out there. Maybe I'll start with you, John. But I'm very aware that what Christian was just talking about, what's happening at the border, so many people have touched on specific issues, mental health. All of this intersects with politics and policy, and we're under 2 weeks away from our midterm elections. Where do politics and public life fit into this conversation we're having about the good life? We're here in Washington, D.C. There are people in the audience who work on the Hill, who work at advocacy organizations. Can politics bring people together, or is it only going to divide us? Does it enrich or does it diminish? Is the common good a core principle of Catholic social thought possible in the U.S. political scene today? And I'll start with you, John, and if anyone else wants to comment.
Sure. I think starting from kind of how our, our church thinks about it, politics is oriented toward the common good. There's a difference between sort of partisanship and ideology and politics. So politics is the search for, in some ways, the collective good life, the common good. So I think we do have at our disposal in the church a different framework for understanding politics. Pope Francis talks about the need for a new kind of politics. So politics is not a bad thing, right? I think sometimes in our popular imagination, we sort of conflate partisanship and the ugliness of politics with the pursuit of living together and creating policies. Whether politics can bring us together, asking that a few weeks before the election, I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is how, in a time when more and more people, particularly young people, are drifting away from institutions, including the church, politics has become a religion for a lot of people. I don't think that's healthy. I do think talking about the balanced life, the good life, if your strongest sense of identity is your partisan or political identity, I think that can be unhealthy. I think that's, sort of the drift away from institutional religion and other institutions, there's been a vacuum that's been filled by a partisan or political identity that can be a bit extreme. That's great thoughts. Yeah.
Anyone else have a thought on politics? Megan, you do?
I know a lot of people in their 30s where work is their religion. It's not even politics, it's their job. Yeah. And people think that politics is just what happens in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every day. It happens here in Washington, D.C. It doesn't happen in South Bend. But in fact, for all of us, the dreams that we have are going to require us to have positions of power over others and to be under somebody else's authority. And that's just what politics is. So there's politics everywhere. There's politics in your family. There's politics in your neighborhood. There's definitely politics in your office and in things that you really care about and in institutions and structures that have the capacity to make your life go really well or to make your life miserable. And for people who are feeling burnt out at work right now, I think that's part of it. So one is just paying attention. These kind of power dynamics are all over the place. And Donald Trump doesn't just have unique control over power in the world. You're part of power dynamics, and you can use that for good or for bad in your own life. And you actually do have a lot of political agency, even if you don't sometimes feel it when you vote every 2 years in one of these major national elections. I also think that this gets to Christian's point that he made very eloquently at the very beginning. This is a time for creativity. And it takes a certain amount of boldness to be at a cocktail party later tonight after this event, or to be in your office, or to be with your family and the people for whom politics is really live for you. And to be willing to say you're changing your mind about something, or to be willing to suggest a third way or a different vision for how things could go, or to not fall into the scripts that, for better or worse, media and some very powerful social institutions right now have tried to put us into. And so kind of also screwing up that courage to make the politics that we feature really prominently in more interesting and also more aligned with what we really care about and what our deepest values are. I think that there's definitely a moment for this right now, and I wish there was more of that creativity happening.
Thanks.
Can I add
Yeah,
something?
sure.
I
And then we'll
just-
take questions.
Yeah, I love, what everybody's saying here. And, really it speaks to this theme of how when we are anxious, when we are distressed, we rely more than ever on our scripts. We just go there. Like that's, our safety, our security. So institutions, our political leanings, all of these things become scripts, and we have a hard time thinking outside of the box. We have a hard time straying from these things that are like templates. They just tell us what to do next. And what, I hear my colleagues saying, and I could not agree more, is that actually this is your disillusionment, your sense of like doneness with institutions is a catalyst for fresh purpose. It is like a good thing. It is something that to be hopeful about. It's the first step to deciding that, that there can be change, is to be dissatisfied, to be discontent. And so I think that this is an opportunity for people, whatever their political leanings were, whatever their religious beliefs were, whatever their educational policy beliefs were, to see themselves again as seekers journeying towards wholeness, and looking at ourselves from 50,000 feet up to understand how we might be different, how we might come to a humble place of hearing other sides and imagining a different future than we've been locked into so far.
Thanks. Bring all of that to the voting booth in 2 weeks. We'll come to questions now. If anyone has a question, raise your hand. We'll be passing a microphone around. We probably have time for 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll continue the conversation at the cocktail hour for those of us in person. So just if you could introduce yourself, say who you're with, and then your question in 1 or 2 sentences.
Sure. Hi, my name's Erin. I work for the University of Notre Dame. I lived here in DC, and I've been thinking about how to actually phrase the question, but I'm going to kind of tell you the scenario and see what you think about it. But as a young adult approaching 30, I'm at a point where I look and a lot of things in my life are good. I've gotten through a lot of kind of crazy years, and I'm on the other side of that where in many ways life is good. However, my friendships are a big part of what I consider a good life. And yet when I look around, so many of my friends are no longer practicing their faith. I would probably say a third of like my core friend group from college still goes to church, at least among those that were already Catholic. And it's sort of discouraging. And so I feel like I'm in this in-between space where I don't know whether that's just what people do in their 20s and I just need to accept the fact that a lot of people aren't going to be going to church, or am I supposed to keep on to those friendships and find a way to bring them into what I consider the good life, which includes my faith life and everything that comes along with it. So I guess sort of my question is how to navigate, I think we are social beings and friendships are important. I can't just say, well, I'm not going to have friends because they're not Catholic, So how do you kind of find that balance between maintaining friendships, which are part of the good life, and yet seeing so many of those friends sort of reject the church and therefore maybe a part of your own identity?
Yeah.
I love that question. I think it's so real. I think that there's some statistic that that in this generation there are more people who embrace spirituality than ever before, but the greatest number who are unaffiliated with a church, right? And I do see this as an opportunity. As much as I love the church, I think it's an opportunity to see God as not contained within a building and walls, and those are template, again, like even if they comfort us, even if they enable us to access God or to, to experience God, they are not God. And so I think that that this peeling away that some people are experiencing of, deconstructing the church or constructing, if they're millennials or Gen Zers, it is very troubling, and it's a scary place to be, because it's like, well, then what do I value? But, again, I think that that's the first step to having genuine faith, is like recognizing that this isn't about what I'm adopting from others' faith beliefs, but this is an opportunity at this juncture of my life to really ask myself, like, what do I believe? What do I value? What is my relationship like with God? And so, I would not be so quick to count out those people who, are around you, who are maybe coming away from the church and questioning it, because probably many of them are on a very important spiritual journey that's going to bring them to a place of more authentic faith and an ability to deeply connect with you around spiritual things. So I think it's just the beginning of something great.
Let's take another question. I know there's probably more comments from the panel. Sure.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm a graduate student at Georgetown, and I'm a Notre Dame grad. That's how you know I have terrible taste in football. But so I want to ask a very similar question. That's how I know the Holy Spirit is with us, to our panelists. I helped out with the Synod on Synodality in my home diocese. And one thing that we heard over and over and over again from thousands of Catholics was that they are so heartbroken that their children do not come to Mass with them, or their children have rejected the faith. And even abstracting from that, we see in the recent report released at the national level on the Synod from Synodality that in the United States, Catholics increasingly feel caught between practicing their faith and walking with and being a loving friend, partner, spouse, whatever, to the person in their life who is homosexual, to the person in their life who rejects the faith, the person in their life who's had an abortion, to the person in their life who has had a divorce and not an annulment. So the question I have for our panelists is, what is going on? Why is it so hard for Catholics, especially young Catholics, to see the value in their faith, most importantly in those tough moments in their life when the faith should be most valuable for them? And then to get even more specific, whose job is it to fix this? Is it the Catholic institutions that educate us? Is it the church that preaches to us? Who needs to explain better how these church teachings are actually useful in those really tough moments of life and don't have to be a reason you can't be there for the people in your life that experience these things that are contra church teaching?
Thank you. Megan, do you want to just quickly respond? Yeah.
I think this is a great question, and as somebody who's been Catholic for almost 20 years now and have gone through like different life stages and had friends that I made at church and then gone through life stages with people who've left, I mean, it's complicated. I think you ask who's responsible. Jesus ultimately, but we have some responsibility also. Like the Manifest Church is a welcoming environment that we're creating or not, and it's answering people's deepest needs or not. Or it's seemingly a place that people can go for answers or not based on the work that we do within the church to build it up and strengthen it or not. I think, one of the greatest wishes I have for our mutual institution, Notre Dame, but for Catholic institutions that people really care about and want to be really strong in the next 20, 50 years so that they're available for folks who need them. I think that we've got to make these institutions keep Catholicism weird. Like keep these ideas from getting so narrow or pigeonholed that people even know what they're walking away from. And I also think sometimes, and this gets to Aaron's question a little bit, for faithful Catholics, we're always trying to run the marathon when we should have been probably practicing with some 4K races with our friends before. So we want to you have 3 drinks at a cocktail party and then you're like, I want to talk to you about your faith, or I want to talk to you about what happens when you die. And people are checked out, or I want to talk to you about abortion. It's a buzzkill. And partially it's because these are complex, really important church teachings, but they're complex. Those are like, there's a lot that goes into having a fully formed, well-discerned view about those questions in Catholic life. But there are plenty of opportunities in our offices and with our friends where we can just drop like little things like, oh, hey, I knew you had a big job interview today. I lit a candle at the grotto for you and I said this prayer. You don't have to respond, but I did it. If you have questions, I'd love for you to come try it. Like the little habitual, to John's point, things that go into a flourishing Catholic life that don't require like tackling the really big, complex, feels like a hand grenade kind of questions in Catholicism right away. And so things that we can do that. You can give that to people in your life, and then maybe planting those little mustard seed style ideas that over time then are going to grow into something more mature. And we do have some responsibility for that, I think.
That's great. Thank you. I know we're at time here. If it's okay, I think we're going to close up and continue the conversation upstairs, like I said. Before we close, I just want to quickly preview some upcoming dialogues that we have. On Wednesday, November 16th, just after the election, we're holding an online Latino leader gathering on how are Latinos changing politics and how are politics changing Latinos. This Latino leader gathering is an extension of these Salt and Light gatherings, and it brings together young Latino Catholics to explore key issues involving faith and public life with distinguished Latinos and other leaders. And then the very next day on Thursday, November 17th, we're hosting a public dialogue at Georgetown's main campus in the ICC auditorium on faith and the faithful in the 2022 midterm. So something we talked about tonight. For those of you in the DC area, we hope you can join us for that, and it'll also be live streamed. So visit our website for updates on those and to sign up. This discussion is being recorded and will be posted on our website and social media channels in the next few days, so keep an eye out for that and share it with your friends. I just want to say thank you to the School of Continuing Studies for offering us this beautiful space, a lot easier to get to in DC than heading over to the Georgetown neighborhood. Thanking all of our vendors, special thanks to my colleagues John Carr and Kim Daniels, our co-directors, and Christian Sunan, who also put a lot of effort in to make this come together. Thank you all for joining us here at the School of Continuing Studies, and thank all of you who are watching online. And finally, join me in thanking our wonderful panel, John Gehring, Belle Liang, Christian Sunan, and Megan Sullivan. Thanks for joining us.